Hey guys, what's happening? Roosh here, and today we're talking about plant cells and how they are different than animal cells. Today what we're going to cover is the plant cell wall, the large central vacuole, and the chloroplast. Now if we take a look at the picture of this plant cell, we'll notice that it doesn't have the same shape as the other cells that we've been looking at. All the other cells have been animal cells, and they just have a regular circular shape, not much structure to it. But now when we look at a plant cell has lots of structure, and typically they always have this boxed shape, okay? Now why do they have that box shape? That box shape is the plant cell wall, okay? Now, plant cells do have most of the organelles the animal cells have. They do have a plasma membrane, okay? But outside of the plasma membrane, they have this rigid structure, and that's what gives it that box shape, okay? So the cell wall is made up of cellulose, and if you remember what that suffix "-ose" means, "-ose" means that it's a sugar or a carbohydrate. So why does this have that suffix "-ose"? Why is it a sugar or carbohydrate? Well, one thing that plants make for us is they make starch, okay? And if you remember what starch is a polymer of glucose molecules, okay? We're going to go ahead and eat that starch. We're going to break starch down into its building blocks, into simple sugars, into simple glucose molecules, and then in our muscles, we're going to reassemble that into glycogen. And starch is the storage form of carbohydrate for plants. Glycogen is the animal form of stored carbohydrates for animals. Now, take a look at the cellulose. Cellulose is made out of the same monomer as starch and glycogen, okay? Cellulose is made out of repeating units of glucose molecules. But an important thing is, for us and for the plant, cellulose is not used for energy. Cellulose is used for support and protection. Now, why is that? Well, not only does every glucose molecule bond to the one next to it, but it's also going to cross-link with the ones underneath it. Okay? So these glucose molecules form a super strong structure. And this is the structure that's on the outside of the plant cell, which gives it this box shape. Now, why is this important for plants? This is why plants are able to grow so tall. Okay? Plants could grow several feet tall, so that way they could get lots and lots of sunlight at higher levels, okay? And why are they able to grow so tall without falling over? It's the plant cell wall, okay? If you ever heard of people talk about dietary fiber, make sure you eat lots of fiber. Well, fiber is actually cellulose, and we'll talk more about that when we get into the digestive system. But make that connection. Anytime you see fiber on a food label or hear anybody talk about fiber, part of that fiber is the plant cell wall, and it's indigestible, and we'll talk about that later on in the year. Next we have the large central vacuole, and if you remember, animal cells do have a vacuole, but they're super small. They're much smaller, okay? That would be about the size of an animal vacuole. In a plant, we have, in every cell, there is a large central vacuole, and it's this guy right here. The large central vacuole. Okay? And what does a large central vacuole do? Well, if you think about it, you and I, if we get thirsty, we could go find water somewhere. A plant doesn't have that option. So the plant cells have to have a large central vacuole so they could store water for a later use. And if you've ever seen celery that's limped over like this, why is that? Well, when the plant cells have lots and lots of water, that large central vacuole is actually going to squish all the organelles over here. They're all going to be squished up against the brim. And all this water is going to put pressure on the sides of the cell. Okay? Now, what happens if that plant isn't getting enough water and it starts losing water in the central vacuole? Well, then it starts to deflate. It's depleted of water. And it doesn't have that added pressure on the sides to give it its structure. Okay? So the large central vacuole is storage for water in plants, and that pressure adds to support it. Okay. The last thing that we're going to talk about is the chloroplast. To me, the chloroplasts are these little green jelly-looking donuts. And what does the chloroplast do for the plant? Well, it takes three things. It takes sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water. It takes those three things and it transforms that into glucose and oxygen. Okay? So why is that important to us? Well, we need oxygen to breathe and we need glucose to eat. Okay? So we actually depend on plants from that process of photosynthesis. Where does photosynthesis take place? In the chloroplast. Okay? So this is what I want you to jot down. The site of photosynthesis, and it converts light energy into chemical energy. That chemical energy is glucose. Okay? And lastly, if we go ahead and recap, the first thing that we talked about was the plant cell wall. It's this outer layer, this outer rim outside of the plasma membrane, and the cell wall is made up of cellulose. Cellulose is indigestible fiber. Next, we talked about the large central vacuole. When the large central vacuole is filled with water, it adds pressure to the plant cell. And the last thing that we talked about was the chloroplast. And simply, the chloroplast is the site for photosynthesis. There you go. And that is it for today.